My guest for today is Frank Fannon, former Assistant Secretary of State for Energy Resources. You are most welcome. Good to have you today.
Thank you. It's a delight to be with you.
There is a big uproar in the United States from senators about Biden administration talks with Venezuela and Iran about oil or importing oil. What do you think about this?
Yeah, no, I think that the uproar, as you described it, is well suited. I would reflect on some comments by some bipartisan members of the United States Senate, including the current chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Mr. Menendez, who, to paraphrase, said, we ought not switch our reliance from one dictator and despot to another. I think that there's a clear understanding of, and I think that concept, that idea is widely held on both sides of the political aisle. Of course, the question about gas prices at the pump is always something that is politically challenging for any U.S. president. But I think we have what Menendez and others are speaking to is a bit bigger value than just pump prices.
So do you think they can buy oil from Venezuela or Iran, and such a deal can happen without an agreement with Iran, especially on the nuclear, while the nuclear negotiation is on?
No, I don't think so. I think any kind of relaxation of the sanctions would have to be part and parcel of a broader arrangement with Iran. According to media reports right now, Russia is actually the one who's stopping some of those deliberations from proceeding, given that they feel that they have some degree of leverage over the United States in this.
Mm-hmm. You had an article on the Wall Street Journal. You said, or the title was, "How the U.S. Can Siphon Russia's Oil Revenue." Can you elaborate more on the main idea in this article?
Yes. So in my piece in the Wall Street Journal, I reflected on our successful experience working on Iran oil sanctions, as well as oil sanctions on Venezuela. And I thought, is there a pathway where we could impose sanctions and be more aggressive than what the Biden administration has done in a broader context? And so, borrowing those lessons learned, I identified three key areas on what we could be doing. The first thing is, when we developed our sanctions regime against Iran, we did it in partnership, very close partnership, with aligned producing countries, particularly Arab Gulf producing countries. And so first I suggested that the Biden administration go speak to those countries in a productive way, in a way of partnership, because we're asking them to be a party to help balance the oil market. Also, I pointed out in my piece that these countries, we ought not look at them just in a transactional kind of point of view, but one, again, with a broader set of equities, including on-air matters of defense and commerce, as well as energy. Second, I pointed out that the perception, I had that published when I was at the International Premier Global Energy Conference, CERAWeek in Houston, and I was talking to leaders of business around the world, and there was this palpable feeling that the Biden administration is demonizing the oil and gas industry. Mm-hmm. And so what that effectively means is that there's a perception in the financial markets to not invest in oil and gas because these companies won't be around anymore, because we're not going to need oil and gas anymore. So why invest in them? This is creating a real constraint against capital being mm-hmm. deployed to energy. Mm-hmm. When we were in the administration, we worked and we had a close understanding. The U.S. government doesn't control the oil and gas business, but we had a reasonable understanding of how the companies would respond to market conditions when we imposed sanctions on Iran, and respond they did, and we ended up producing 13 million barrels of oil. So what I suggested is that whether it's accurate or just a perception, the Biden administration could approach the industry in more of a collaborative way and say that we recognize that producing oil and gas in a sustainable way is actually consistent with a low carbon future. That would unlock some of that capital. And third, I pointed out that politicians in the United States should understand that this is this is something that's going to take some time to impose these sanctions, and it's going to be not without cost. We have to think about phasing it in.
We're going to talk about it. Based on this, do you think that Biden will visit the Gulf, especially Saudi Arabia first, to ask or talk with its leader about increasing oil production?
Well, according to media reports, President Biden was planning to take a trip to Riyadh. And as I put out in my piece, I think this is a very good first step. We focus a lot when we speak to these countries about these countries on oil, but I think it's important that we also have a constructive relationship with them in a broader frame. This shouldn't be a transactional kind of approach, but oil right now we're at a crisis moment. And I think getting all of our partners on the same side is an imperative. And President Biden's outreach to leaders in the region is really important. I applaud him for doing it.
The Emirati ambassador for Washington, Yusuf Al-Otaiba, said that his country favors more oil production and will be encouraging OPEC to consider a higher output. Your approach on this?
Yeah, I think it's reflective of some of the outreach. I think that's a very good first signal. The Emirates are an important partner with the United States in so many areas, but also an important voice within the OPEC construct. So I think that's an important voice, and having him come out publicly, I think is an important signal, not just the United States, of course, but actually to the broader OPEC membership.
Mm-hmm. Can you make a comprehensive assessment of the impact of the ban of Russian oil, importing Russian oil to the U.S. and the impact on the U.S. and European economies?
I think pretty much the ban is only on the U.S. importing. Mm-hmm. The U.K. is talking about it, but it's really very small. I mean, in terms of the U.S. Mm-hmm. Russia imports what sounds like a lot, 600 to 700,000 barrels. That sounds like a lot, but that's like 3% of what the U.S. Demand is. So it's pretty marginal. I think, but it's an important symbolic step. And I also point out, we talked about the bipartisan nature of this earlier. There was a legislation moving through Congress that was going to compel the administration to ban the import of Russian energy. So it's an important signal. It's more symbolic, I would say, than material. But again, it's a start.
Mm-hmm. You think that the United States should produce more oil to make up for the loss of Russian oil, and this was many in Congress called for.
Yeah, I think the U.S. Is the biggest oil and gas producer in the world. We actually don't know what our actual capability to produce is, because again, the U.S. government doesn't track that. It's really how the private sector can respond, and we have plenty of optionality out there. But it's that signal set, and it's that whether and to what extent there's some lead up time. It takes time. You have to deploy capital. You have to build, deploy rigs. There's some lead up time. And that's why it's so important to have a consistent message over time sent to the market and the participants in the U.S. That's why I called for in my piece to encourage the Biden administration. They want to see the U.S. government increase production, to send that signal now. I think it's worth noting, even though President Biden made his statement, and I think it was not well received within the oil producing, but Secretary of Energy Granholm, just a day or two ago, gave a speech at the CERAWeek conference, and I would say that she had a much more conciliatory tone and said that she wants to partner with the industry. I think that was an important first step, but we need to see some action, is what I'm hearing from industry leaders.
Ordering oil to be marketed from the U.S. strategic reserve, petroleum strategy, is a solution? Can be a solution?
It's no solution. It's a temporary response in coordination with other countries within the IEA, the International Energy Agency. But stockpiles only last so long. So I think it's an important lever that the U.S. is in coordination with other countries are seeking to deploy. But to do more requires leveling up of U.S. production as well as other producing areas in the world. The SPR, Strategic Petroleum Reserve, is kind of a last measure in terms of unlocking those stockpiles.
Can you explain for us why the ban of Russian oil can cause a disruption in the chain supply globally?
Yeah, well, the ban on Russian oil, the one that was announced, it has a marginal impact, as I mentioned, because it's not an overall ban on Russian oil globally. It's simply the U.S. is not going to import. But I think we are speaking to a broader issue. And what we see is commodity prices writ large. I mean, Russia is one of the biggest commodities producers in the world, and it's having ripple effects around the globe. You know, in certain commodities, even if they're not actually being banned, market participants are rejecting buying contracts from Russia because they're anticipating a further strengthening of our sanctions policy. And so you see this flight going on right now. I mean, the Urals benchmark is you know, selling at $25 a discount. That's because people don't want to buy it because they're fearful of the next step. And Russia has proved itself to be just toxic to deal with right now.
There was a question posed by the Financial Times newspaper. Will the Ukraine war derail the green energy transition? Can you please elaborate on this or help answering the question?
Certainly, yeah. Russia is one of the largest suppliers, a significant supplier of some of the key metals that go into the energy transition technology. So the World Bank has did some assessments on this to achieve climate targets like the Paris Climate Accord. They assess what would this mean for renewable and clean energy technology deployment. These technologies use a greater amount of minerals and metals than conventional technologies. For example, an electric car uses 5 times more copper than an internal combustion engine. So one of the key components for an electric car battery is nickel. We saw just the other day, the London Metals Exchange, the biggest clearinghouse for metals trade in the world, stop the trade of nickel. Russia is one of the largest, is a large producer of nickel. So it's having these ripple effects across the clean energy supply chain. And if you don't have these metals, you cannot build a clean energy future. You know, as I've said this before, but as clean and green as any clean energy technology may be, it requires very big shovels at the beginning of its life. They still have to dig up those metals and minerals. The World Bank numbers, they project the demand could increase 500 to 1,000% for these metals. And right now you've got this supply constraint and now you throw on the geopolitical risk of Russia, and it's creating ripple effects through. The other point I would just made a comment on oil. It takes some time to ramp up production. Shale is less time than conventional, but it still takes time. That's still a tiny amount of time relative to the discovery and putting a new mine into production. According to the International Energy Agency, they say that it takes 16 years to go from discovering a resource to putting a mine into production. So this is the FT is trying to backward out understand the time horizon, because governments are they talk about increasing levels of climate ambition. That moves up the time horizon, but we are not moving up the supply.
Thank you so much for your time, Frank Fannon. Thank you for your opinion. We appreciate it. We appreciate your appearing on our show.
Delighted to be with you. Thank you so much, Maria.
Hey, Maria Malouf here. Please click to like and subscribe to Maria Malouf TV YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.